Thank you. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And yes, we were the only women there, weren't we? We've been in that position before. It's a funny thing about that. You know, earlier this month, I was in St. Paul for the Republican National Convention, and I'm reluctant to admit that it was my 14th Republican National Convention. I attended, it's been an unbroken line since 1956 when I was a mere babe, very, very young at that time. But at that convention, the Republicans were renominating Susan's grandfather, President Dwight D. Eisenhower. And I was there with my parents, who were very involved in the political process. I don't remember if we first met there or not, Susan, but it's nice to see you again tonight. I don't think you would have been far younger, so you probably wouldn't have remembered it at all. As I said, I've been to a lot of conventions. I attended my first because my mother, Eleanor Todd, was serving as the chairperson of the Committee on Arrangements, which did all the decorations and entertainment in the convention hall. Now, my mother was talented enough and smart enough to have headed up any committee of that convention, and in fact, anything she wanted to do in politics. But arrangements was considered to be a woman's job, so that's what she got. Now, I say she was talented enough and capable enough to have held any position, that's not just a proud daughter speaking. In fact, at the time that she was head of the Arrangements Committee, one of the largest newspapers in the state of New Jersey pegged her as being one of the women who might become the first woman governor of the state of New Jersey. They were only off by 40 years in a generation, but they had my mother pretty well picked. But as I stood on the convention floor this year in St. Paul, I must admit that I couldn't help thinking about how excited my mother would have been to see a woman accepting the party's nomination as vice president. And she would have been just as excited to see Hillary Clinton accept the nomination for president or vice president of her party. The only thing that might have made her prouder would have been if it had been her daughter or one of her granddaughters accepting that. Now, I say she would have been proud, but I have to confess it probably would not have translated to the ballot box. I doubt she would have voted for Hillary, and I'm pretty sure she would have considered Senator Palin as too conservative for her tastes. And my mother was an original Rockefeller Republican and a very strong Rockefeller Republican. But she still would have been deeply satisfied to see the kind of progress that women have made and to see this kind of national recognition. The kind of progress that was really unimaginable 50 or even 25 years ago. When I was starting out in the late 1960s, women were only just making their way back into the workforce. And I say back into the workforce because the roots of the modern day women's movement really go back to the Second World War, when so many men were enlisting in the Army, opening up a vast array of jobs that women were moving out of the home into the job force in ways that they had never been able to before. Some of you may have seen that poster of Sarah Palin dressed in the blue denim shirt with a kerchief on her head and showing off her muscles and with the caption, "We can do it." That's an updated version of a World War II poster that was very prevalent at the time, talking about women taking their place in the workforce. As you know, however, when the war was over and the men started to come back to reclaim their jobs, women moved back into the home. But they'd had a taste of what it was like to be outside and to have these other responsibilities, and they didn't want their daughters to have to wait for another world war to get the same kind of opportunities that they had had. Well, my mother wasn't employed outside of the home. Both she and her mother were incredibly strong women. Neither of them ever felt the least bit constrained by what was commonly referred to as the woman's place. And I have to admit, my father didn't accept those kinds of limits either. I can remember spending agonizing hours on the front lawn learning how to cast a fly, because my father expected me to be able to cast that fly and set the hook just as well as he and my brothers did. But both my parents instilled in me a belief that I could succeed in anything for which I had the drive and the talent to achieve. I never grew up believing that my horizons were limited. And it was probably that confidence that was the reason it took me so long to fully understand or appreciate the constraints that others wanted to place on me in what I was doing because of my gender. During my time as governor, I was often asked, what's it like to be a woman governor? How's it different? And my answer was probably too flip, because my answer was always, well, I don't know. I've never been a man governor. I can't tell you what the difference is. And at the time, I was thinking, gender really isn't something I can do anything about. I guess maybe today I could. But I never really confronted just what kind of a difference it made, in fact. Now that I've been out of public office for a few years, and I've had a chance to look back and to look at things, there's no doubt that the fact that I wasn't one of the boys made some things more difficult than they needed to be. And I don't say that by reason of excuse, just as an observation. And what I want to do is tell you just a couple of stories to illustrate that, because they're not far from what both Senator Clinton and Governor Palin have faced and are facing today. Shortly after I graduated from college, I got my first job down in Washington working for the Republican National Committee. And apparently back in 1969, a woman taking on one of those roles was somewhat of a novelty. In any event, after I'd been there for a couple of weeks, the New Jersey Republican State Committee newsletter carried a little blurb about my position, and I think it was because my father had recently resigned as the state chairman. But they said, good luck and good learning to Chris Todd, who was doing her political thing at national headquarters as assistant to the first assistant. She's Papa Bear's bundle of charm, wit, and political savvy. Now, I have to admit the condescending tone of that still gets under my skin a little bit, primarily because I know if it had been one of my brothers, they would not have called him Papa Bear's pretty bundle of anything. It would have been he was the heir apparent, or something similar to that. They would have recognized that as being a natural progression of things. Of course, not every politico back then thought that I was nothing more than just a pretty bundle of whatever they wanted to call me. My first time down there in D.C. and a job also included working for someone that you might have heard of. His name was Donald Rumsfeld, and he was head of the Office of Economic Opportunity. And I'll never forget attending one meeting of senior staff when one member of the staff, one gentleman, used some swear word to describe something, and another gentleman immediately said, "Can't say that, Christie's here." And Don Rumsfeld, trying to calm the waters, looked over and said, "Oh, don't worry about Christie, she's just one of the guys." And I was thrilled. I was delighted that I had been accepted that way. I didn't want people to feel that they had to tiptoe around me. On the other hand, I will say that that's a pretty sad commentary when you have to accept that kind of a comment as being reflective of having made it, as it were. And I never felt the need to become one of the guys in quite the way that phrase is often meant. I don't need to use foul language, I don't smack people on the back, and I don't feel the need to watch football all day on Sunday, no matter how much I like it. And I do enjoy football. But of course, while Rumsfeld may have thought that I was one of the boys, over the years I have confronted many occasions where people just haven't been able to look past my gender. And again, I think that's absolutely true, unfortunately, still today in far too many circumstances. 25 years later, after I left Washington, when I was running for governor, people were still writing about my appearance. You would have thought I was running for prom queen instead of the chief executive of a state of 8 million people. In fact, more than one political reporter seemed to suddenly find their inner fashion. They got in touch with their inner fashion self while they reported on me. I can remember one article from a male reporter who said, "She looks too aristocratic, too serene in her tweed suit with her jewelry and every hair in place to possibly relate to the average voter in the state of New Jersey." And another one called me a Tom Kane, referring to the previous Republican governor, Tom Kane in pearls. Now, I don't ever recall them writing about my opponent, for example, as wearing yet another boring suit with a starched white shirt and predictable red tie, or calling somebody else a Todd Whitman in cufflinks. It's discouraging for me, and I think frankly for all of us, and particularly those involved in the Women's Study program, to know that Hillary Clinton has faced the same problems 15 years later. I don't know about you, but I got very tired about reading about her wearing yet another pantsuit, the ubiquitous pantsuit, and having a discussion about that. Why doesn't anyone ever write that the male politicians wore yet another predictable, boring blue suit? I'm still not sure what Sarah Palin's hairstyle has to do with her ability to govern. And I'll admit, though, that when you're on the campaign trail, you do wear a lot of pantsuits. They're more comfortable, they're easier to get around, and we can actually brighten them with some colors. And I'm a proud member of the Sisterhood of Traveling Pantsuits. I don't worry about that. After I was elected governor, one of the goals that I set for myself was to attract as many talented, capable women to government as I possibly could. By the time I left office, I had appointed the first female governor's chief of staff, the first female attorney general, the first female chief justice of our state Supreme Court, and appointed women to scores of other positions traditionally held by men. All of these women were highly qualified and experienced. And yet it didn't take long before my staff started hearing some rumblings from down the hall in the legislature. They started referring to the governor's office as the estrogen palace. I never returned the favor by referring to them as the testosterone castle, but then having dealt with them for a number of years, that probably wouldn't have been fair anyway to say about them. Yet in politics today, too many people are predisposed to think that women are still what has been called the weaker sex, a term clearly coined by a man who's never gone through childbirth. There's just no question about that. In my first gubernatorial campaign, again, a newspaper wrote that voters, including Republicans, grouse that Mrs. Whitman isn't tough or aggressive enough, a frequent complaint about women candidates. I think that's one reason, quite frankly, that Sarah Palin has struck such a chord. She's a proud lifetime member of the NRA, and she can shoot and dress a moose, which is a man's definition of being tough, and because most of them couldn't do it either. Of course, as I mentioned before, too many people, though, have a hard time. They want to see that, but they have a very hard time accepting it in a woman. They don't know quite how to deal with toughness. They don't see it as an asset. They think it makes you, I mean, you know the word that rhymes with witch, it starts with a B. Yet in politics, and really any field, in order to succeed, you have to be tough. The challenge for women, and the real question we face, is not should we be tough, but how do we evidence that toughness in a way that doesn't feed into the stereotypes that people are looking for, the things that people want to throw back at us, in our face. In my career, I've always found that the best way to evidence toughness is to have a clear sense of your objectives and goals, a clear path for advancing them, and an absolute commitment to achieving them. Knowing what you want to accomplish and sticking to your guns is a true measure of toughness. And I want to tell you, neither Hillary Clinton nor Sarah Palin would be where they are today if they hadn't had that kind of quality and that kind of real toughness, the kind that makes a difference. It's important to remember that toughness can be exhibited in many ways. And in my experience, the more subtle ways are the most effective. I've always tried to control my temper and never get really mad at people and yell. I don't mean suppress my temper, I just mean control it. I think there are far more effective ways of letting people know you're unhappy with what they're doing than yelling at them. We don't have to, as women, and we shouldn't, adopt some of the worst behaviors of some of the men just to prove we're as tough as they are. That's not productive on anyone's behalf. And in fact, there are times when we can turn the stereotypes about women to our advantage, as I did when I was running for the United States Senate in 1990 against someone who's been a speaker here, Bill Bradley. He was a very popular senator at the time, and I was a huge underdog in the race. In fact, as a result, I had an enormously difficult time raising money and getting any attention from the press. The press just didn't bother to cover the campaign, and the big donors were not rushing to write checks for what they saw as an absolute losing cause. What I really needed was to be able to meet the senator in a series of debates so that we could have some kind of a discourse so I could identify and show myself to the public. But the senator, as any good incumbent would, didn't think that was such a good idea. And so finally, we decided to play the gender card. My campaign put out a press release that detailed the months of efforts to arrange debates, along with some previous quotes of Senator Bradley's about how important debates were to the political process. And then it quoted me as saying that I can only conclude that Mr. Bradley believes it is beneath him to debate a woman, or he's just plain afraid to debate. Well, I don't have to tell you that within 2 days we had 2 debates set up. And they made an enormous difference in that race. They allowed the voters to see me as a credible candidate who had some understanding of the issues, and they allowed me to pin him down on some state issues that he'd been avoiding. Those debates played a key role in turning what was supposed to have been a knockout to a nail-biter. He'd won his previous election by some 16 points. He beat me by 3. And that helped launch me onto the governor's office. That allowed me to build for the future and then become governor of the state. The voters are going to be looking for much the same thing in the upcoming debates, and particularly the vice presidential debates. They want to see how Governor Palin handles herself. And here's where the absence of having a woman on the national stage for some 24 years is going to show can play to her advantage, quite frankly, and show itself. I'm sure Senator Biden's staff right now is trying to figure out how he should conduct himself in this debate. They won't want him to treat her with kid gloves, because that's condescending, but they also want to make sure he doesn't come across too aggressive, as Rick Lazio did when he debated against Hillary Clinton for the Senate in New York in 2000. Yet they run the risk of making him so self-conscious that he's just going to seem uncomfortable next to Governor Palin. It's going to be interesting to watch. The unfortunate thing is many people may make their decisions and judge this based on those superficial qualities that they see and not on the content of what the responses are to the questions in the debates. And that's something we have to watch very, very carefully. As encouraged as I am by the fact that women have played a prominent role in this year's presidential campaign, I'm still discouraged at what a small percentage we represent in the corridors of power in Washington. We are vastly underrepresented as women. Today, women make up just 16% of the Congress, and there are only 8 women governors. Now, that is progress, because there was a period of time where I was the only female governor in the entire country. So we're getting better. Yet over the past 50 years, women have served or are serving as president or prime minister of over 36 countries, including the world's oldest democracy, Great Britain, its largest democracy, India, and its most embattled democracy, Israel. And yet here in the United States, we have yet to elect a woman president, or even to the vice presidency. When I first started in politics, I thought women would rise much more quickly than we have. But when I feel frustrated by the seemingly glacial pace of change, I remember what my late friend Maureen Reagan said. And she really said it very well. She said, "I'll feel equality has arrived when we are able to elect to office women as unqualified as some of the men who are already there." Now, that's not something I would advocate, but I know what she was getting at. I know what she meant. We need, and women particularly, need to do a better job of supporting other women. We are much harder on other women than we are on our male counterparts. There are lots of ways to help bring more women into politics. And I'd like to mention just one, a program that we have in New Jersey and that are in at least 20 other states called the Excellence in Public Service Series, These series have a goal of giving, and I can only speak on the Republican side. I'm sure the Democrats must have something similar. I just don't know it. But on the Republican side, the goal is giving Republican women who are interested in political service but don't necessarily have the experience or the understanding of what it takes an opportunity to be exposed to it and the opportunity to get the experience and the contacts that they're going to need to be able to go further. I was very honored that the program in New Jersey was named after me. And each year, a group of between 15 and 20 women are selected to participate in this Whitman series, as it's called. They meet once a month, over 9 months, at various places around the state to learn from successful politicians and office holders what it took to get where they are. And they are assigned a mentor as well who helps them understand what they can do. An already accomplished woman, in government or politics. To date, more than 160 women have graduated from the Whitman series, the New Jersey program, and 1,000 have done so in other states. Many of our Whitman series alumni have run and won offices for election at the local, county, and state levels, and we now have alumni serving in every branch of government in the Garden State, again, at state, county, and local level. If you want to learn more about the Whitman series or about any of these series, it's www.whitmanseries.org, and that has a link to all the other programs in the other states. And there is one here in Pennsylvania called the Austin series, and I would urge you to check these out, young women particularly, to look at it and look at the Anstein series here in Pennsylvania, and look for it and see how that can help you advance your desires and your dreams. Of course, I want to make very clear that my support for women is not just some sort of female solidarity thing, and it's not just because we've been denied our place at the table for so very long. I believe that part is certainly true, but it's also because we have different life experiences and we do bring a different way of problem solving to the table. With the complexity of today's issues, I do not believe any one group has all the answers. And the more diverse the thinking at the table, deciding on policy, the better the answers are going to be that we get, and the more sustainable they're going to be for the long haul. And that's the thing we should remember. I think that today, more than ever before, our unique set of experiences and skills are desperately needed. Government wouldn't be perfect if it were run entirely by women, but it sure couldn't be a whole lot worse than what we're seeing today. That's why it annoys me somewhat that women candidates seem to be much more carefully scrutinized and held to a much higher standard of performance than our male counterparts. I'm not against high standards. I believe we should have them. I do object, however, to being held to a double standard. High standards are fine. My own daughter, Kate, experienced this firsthand this year. She, back home in New Jersey, ran in the Republican primary for Congress for a seat of a congressperson. It was an open seat, and the Republican who had held the seat decided to retire after just 4 terms. Kate's 30 years old. She's a mom. She has twin boys, our grandsons, who are 3. She has worked in senior positions on Capitol Hill in the Bush administration. She's had her own business. She has run as executive director of a political action committee, and she has a real estate license in New Jersey. And yet, time and again, throughout this primary campaign, she was told she was too young and inexperienced. In contrast, the member of Congress she was trying to succeed was 30 years old when they ran for office, had worked as a teacher at a private school, and had small children at home. Yet I never heard the question asked or the statement made, "You're too young and too inexperienced." The difference? Kate was a woman, and the member of Congress she was seeking to succeed was a man. And it's really just that simple. Hillary Clinton and Sarah Palin have each been subjected to the same set of double standards in many different manifestations. And it's discouraging to think that we haven't made more progress. We have to ask ourselves, what's holding us back? What's holding us back besides all those reasons with which women are all too familiar? Now, I'm a great fan of American musicals. I think just about every expression of emotion or thought can be found somewhere in the lyrics of an American musical. And as I've been thinking and watching this campaign play out, there's been one musical and one part of it that keeps coming back to me, and that's one called Avenue Q. And the song is, "Everyone's a little bit racist." And there's a line that goes, and I won't sing it, I promise. "Maybe it's a fact we should all face. Everyone makes judgments based on race." And I'd change that just a little bit and say, maybe it's a fact we should all remember. Everyone makes judgments based on gender. I wonder if perhaps we couldn't move further ahead than we have if all of us admitted it, that we have some prejudices, that we are just a little bit sexist. Let's face it, who among us, the women, have not generalized about our male counterparts? We do that. We all have prejudices, all of us. They may not be about race or gender. They may be about the length of hair or the kind of clothes somebody wears or the accent with which they speak or what school they went to. The list goes on. And let's face it, as I said earlier, women are often harder on other women than we are on our male counterparts. And maybe all of us, men and women, need to admit that we still make judgments about people based on characteristics that really have nothing to do with their ability and their potential. Perhaps we need to be more honest with ourselves about relying on superficialities before we even consider a person's intelligence or their experience, or their character, their vision, their commitment, or their judgment. Those are the important things about which we should want to learn. And those should drive us to look beyond just the superficial parts that we get so often on television and in the 30-second sound bites. As I said a few minutes ago, all of us, including women, face a unique set of challenges in our individual efforts to assume our rightful places in the world. And I do believe it's a challenge for all of us, male and female, but particularly for female and for minorities. But I'm also here to tell you that the challenges we face are they're not insurmountable, and they're well worth the price you pay in overcoming them. There's no question about that. That being said, I think there's no such thing as Superwoman. She doesn't exist. If you are a wife or a mother or in any way responsible for another human being, you will inevitably face those times when you are torn between conflicting priorities. It's going to be a fact of life. It just is. I've had those nights when I've been kept awake thinking I was shortchanging my kids or I was shortchanging the job. But I've been lucky. I have a very supportive husband and two very patient children, I should say. And there have been fewer of those nights than one might think. I've been able to work hard to strike a balance that works for me. And everyone's balance is going to be slightly different. But for me, I've always remembered that the most important thing and the thing that will always be there for me, whatever my title is, and right now it's former of a lot of things, is going to be my family. They will be there. Every time I'm on a college campus and have the opportunity, as I did today, to speak with students, and tonight, I am energized, and I feel my confidence about the future and a woman's place in it particularly is renewed. In the 40 years, and that's what it's been since I graduated from college, women have been struggling to find their place in America's political arena. It hasn't always been a smooth or straight path ahead, but we have made progress, and that's so very evident in today's political campaign. I believe this generation is going to make enormous strides, far beyond anything that we've seen in the past. And my confidence and my hope is that that is something that's going to come into play in this election cycle and the ones immediately following, that there will be no letdown after this cycle, that people will continue to be committed. And it's with a sense of optimism about women and their place in the political world that I look at what's happening today. And I'm already looking forward, I'm not sure I'm looking forward to it, but I'm anxious to see what the Republican convention in 2012 looks like, because I'm convinced that there will be women playing far more important roles then. and there than they are today. And the same thing is going to be true of the Democrat convention. But it won't happen if young women and young men don't get more involved and understand that we all benefit when we call on the talents that all of us have to offer, and understand there is no one group that has all the right answers. It's incumbent on all of us to find the best in each other. And that's how we're going to make this country as great as it should be and can be again. With that, I thank you very much for having invited me here, and I look forward to answering your questions. But thank you very much.